you're an alcoholic in 1940. There's no AA meeting in your city. Maybe you're lucky enough to be close to Akron, Ohio, and you take a train because you've heard that there's a doctor there who has the quote cure for alcoholism. And I'm talking about Dr. Bob, right? So you get on a train, probably drunk. You go, you find Dr. Bob's house in Akron. Maybe you fall asleep on his front porch overnight. He wakes up in the morning. He sees you there. It's not an uncommon thing. Or you end up in the alcoholic ward in Akron, which he visited a lot, the psychological ward. But if you've ended up in his front porch, he takes you upstairs. Some of you have been there. I've been to this house in Akron, and you get there, and the surrender room is on the second story. He had a 4-story house, like a 3-story plus a basement. The second story had the surrender room. They'd take you in there. They'd get you on your knees. You do some sort of prayer of turning your life over, which is now what we call the third step prayer. They'd roll you into bed to sleep it off. And then in the morning or later in the day, you'd come downstairs and he had whiskey there. And this doctor would wean you off the alcohol because if you try to quit cold turkey, you can die from alcohol. So he'd wean you off and he would begin writing your inventory. Okay. And he'd be asking you questions. Okay. So who are you angry at? Because your hands are probably shaking because you got the DTs, because that's what alcoholism was for most people back then, because there was no solution. Right. So how did that all happen? So he's taking you through it in a few days' time. You're, just off of the alcohol, but you've got a new plan. You've got a new idea about you're going to go back to your hometown and you're going to make your amends. And Dr. Bob in the book, it says he made all of his amends in one day. He started in the morning and he came home at midnight. He made all of his amends in one day. So you go make all of your amends and then you start going to the alcoholic ward, because there was one in every major city, the psych wards, the alcoholic wards, the asylums. And you'd go and say, hey, do you have a drunk here that I can work with? And they're like, boy, are you excited, going to be excited. We got nothing but drunks and addicts for you to work with. Okay. And then that's how you started your meeting, is you sponsored someone into the meeting. That is how this movement has spread. Okay. That is how this movement has spread. That's wild to me. So when you're feeling AA or the 12 step rooms, they become an institution, which is when I don't feel right, I go to a meeting. In the 1930s and 40s, if you didn't feel right, you had to go help somebody. Okay. And that you had to go be a sponsor. You had to go practice the 12 step right away. So do not be afraid of practicing this stuff right now. Even if you don't know what an inventory is or how to make an amends, we're going to cover that today. And you're going to get hooked up with somebody here that you can stay connected with while you go and do these things if you've never done these steps before. Okay. Who's still with me? You guys still with me? Still feeling the energy? Still feeling the aliveness? Okay. Now, love it. Thank you for being, I love the people getting it fired up in the chat over here. Okay. Now, okay. This is such a huge idea. I'm excited about this. Okay. All right. So the core of the AA program, the core of the AA program, the core of the 12 steps is about applying a standard into your life. Okay. You're applying a standard into your life. And these specifically these 4 standards. Okay. If you raise your standards, you're going to get new results. If these standards for your thinking, standards for your speaking, standards for your conduct and behavior. Okay. So and I would also say standards for your emotion. So you have things on the inside that you have standards for and things on the outside that you have standards for, and also called absolutes. Okay. So either standards or absolutes, whatever you want to say it. These are things to help you in your inner world to raise your life up. So this is from something called the Oxford Group, which was the precursor to the 12-step movement. Now, the interesting thing about this is the Oxford Group is still around, but it's changed its name. It had to change its name because it had a person who was in charge of it. AA doesn't have anybody in charge of it. So notice the difference here. So eventually, while this guy, there was a guy named Frank Buckman, I believe his name was, who started the Oxford Group. And the Oxford Group was it was a Christian group. Okay. So don't log off yet, y'all. Okay. It was a Christian group and it was exploding in popularity all over the world in the 1920s and 30s. And then Frank Buckman, the leader of this thing, these 4 absolutes that they used, it was changing people's lives. There were alcoholics who were able to get sober and stay sober by going to these Oxford Group meetings. Okay, it was this all this movement was happening, and it was Christian. But there were a lot of atheists and agnostics, alcoholics, who were showing up there, and they would say this, well, so what? It works. It doesn't matter what it works. And of course, Christianity was a little bit more popular back then or whatever. There were less scandals at that time than there have been maybe lately in the last 20, 30 years. So these four absolutes, this Frank Buckman guy kind of discovered these were the principal character traits of this fella Jesus, right? The main character from, I think it's still the world's biggest religion, the most populous religion. So the main character, the guy that most people don't have a problem with Jesus, his followers, they, I know for me, I've had ups and downs with that stuff. I've investigated it. I've been a Christian, those sorts of things. But this Frank Buckman guy was like, I found the key. If we just start practicing these character traits, whether or not Jesus was real, whether or not God is real, any of that BS or potential BS, if we practice the character traits of honesty, purity, unselfishness, and love, don't be scared by these words. We're going to translate all of them, by the way. If you practice these things in your principles, in your inner world, in your thinking, if you measure your thinking and your actions against these things, your life's going to change, and you're going to have this whole new experience. You're going to get this whole new directional system where your life is now going to be guided and shown to you. You're going to be more healthy and clear mentally, emotionally, physically, and in your life than ever before. And that's what the results were. People were having this experience all over the place. But Frank Buckman praised Hitler. Womp womp. Frank Buck, because he's the leader of this organization, and I don't know if he actually liked Hitler, but he was trying. Hitler was against the spread of the Oxford group in Germany, and Frank Buckman was saying things to try and get Hitler to change his mind. So he praised Hitler, right? And so when you have somebody in charge of the organization, this is the type of stuff that can happen, right? That's why there's nobody in charge of AA today, right? It's run at the local level with a group conscience, like each meeting is autonomous. Right. And we just use principles that kind of, and steps, and every meeting can do their own thing. Right. So, but these four things are become the core of what the fourth step is. And later on, what the daily 10th step is. These are the four things about how to measure yourself. And so this word purity, it becomes resentment or forgiveness. Okay, so the word purity is coming from a Christian movement, right? So one of the Beatitudes, when Jesus gave the Sermon on the Mount and kind of said, here's what I think you should do. One of the things he said, blessed are the pure of heart, for they shall see God. And he was talking about ridding yourself of resentment, ridding yourself of unforgiveness. That if you're carrying unforgiveness, it toxifies you. If you're carrying vitriol for someone else, your experience within, you're going to be walking around saying all these negative things, and your mind, your brain, your body doesn't know that it's about somebody else. It assumes it's about you. Quote unquote, said Jesus. Okay. So pure of heart is, if you get pure of heart, if you rid yourself of this toxicity, of this unforgiveness, which is toxic resentment, the number one offender, as the big book calls it, then you will see God. That's what Jesus says. Okay. Now, so the funny thing is these four absolutes, if you go to a Cleveland meeting or an Akron meeting, these four absolutes are likely to be on the wall because Dr. Bob really loved the four absolutes. He didn't think that AA should be its own thing. He thought it should stay in the church. When the Catholic Pope issued, I forget, he issued an official statement saying that it would be good if Catholic alcoholics didn't go to the Oxford group because it was in Protestant churches. And then, Bill kind of needed an excuse to make it his own thing. And he said, okay, well, now we're going to be our own thing. We're not religiously affiliated. We're not a denomination. So he removed it from being a Protestant movement. But Dr. Bob pushed back and said, well, you should just make everybody convert. Because Dr. Bob was like a real Christian. He was like a real Midwest Bible-beating Christian. So he thought that Christianity, that Protestantism was the way to go. So, and that maybe this would be a way to promote Protestantism. Okay, so if you go to those meetings, you'll see these four absolutes on the wall around the Akron area. Interestingly enough, if you go to a meeting almost anywhere else on the planet, you probably won't see them because it didn't scale. Okay, so it wasn't something, if an alcoholic walks into a meeting, an addict walks into a meeting, sees absolute purity on the wall, they're like, I must be in the wrong spot. Boop, boop, boop. Right? Okay, I'm never going to get there for me. Okay? Where it's more about forgiveness, purity of heart. Okay? Now, Okay, so and what the OG, the Oxford group, and Back to Basics. This is what I found in Back to Basics and facilitating Back to Basics over the last year plus. Is they chunked it down into these four evening sessions. If you go to four of these sessions, these four sessions, and learn these four meta principles. Surrender is steps 1 through 3. Sharing is steps 4 through 7. Amends is steps 8 and 9, and guidance is steps 10, 11, and 12. When Bill wrote the 12 steps in the big book, it was the first time that they ever been really laid on paper. People were doing kind of their own thing, but it was roughly speaking in these four areas: surrender, sharing, amends, and guidance. So notice that these spiritual principles are also actions or attitudes. So if you have an attitude of surrender, that is apparently going to help you have surrender alcoholism and have a better, swap it out with something better, surrender your addiction. And maybe, as we're going to learn here, step 1 is all about you're already surrendered. You're already good at surrender. Okay. You might not be good at sharing yet. That's a skill that you can improve on. I'm really good at dishonesty. Honesty is the skill that I started to learn in AA, mostly through you people. You would share in these meetings and I would go, they're talking about getting a DUI with their kids in the car. Like, and I would judge it because I'm like, I don't have kids. That's crazy, but that helped me to raise my game, raise my standard of absolute honesty of like, I liked how I felt when I heard that. It made me feel like, wow, I think I never did that, but I definitely drove drunk all the time. I was probably driving drunk in the car next to him. Maybe I shouldn't judge her so harshly or him so harshly because I was doing the same exact thing. If I had kids, I probably would have done the same thing. So now all of a sudden that element of honesty allows me to join, allows me to start hearing those shares and maybe start to make my shares on my own. And when I get to start sharing, this word amends, it means to change. I start changing when I surrender. I start changing when I start sharing, swapping the good and the bad in and out. Okay, I start to swap out my inventory of the stuff that I'm not really approving of, right? And I start to change. Amends means change. And I start to change internally. And then in the program, it's like, now you're going to go demonstrate that change externally and you're going to make amends with people that you've harmed when you were sick. And it's going to help you reinforce your wellness. And if you can make these amends, boy, one of the hardest things is in the entire world is making an amends. And if you can do that, you can probably do just about anything in the rest of your life, including not just paying off debts and making amends in that way, but also perhaps making the world a better place and making your life better, practicing these principles in all of your affairs, getting your bank account in order. You know, I don't know what was harder, like, getting in contact with the IRS and starting to get my 7 years of back taxes paid off, or, talking to my old hockey coach and telling him, that I had slandered his name quite a bit and I had tried to defame his reputation. Those were really hard things for me, but walking through those things, like now, instead of paying debts more often than not, I get to make investments now. But that same skill of, if I can pay off a debt, it means I can have the same discipline to make an investment. And that's both literal and it's also symbolic. Okay. All right. Who's still with me? Anybody get that? Is that a mind-blowing thing for anybody else? That's mind-blowing when I came across this.